What happens when a prince runs out of money? What happens when the golden child of a fairy tale wedding becomes the one man the crown refuses to bankroll? And what happens when that same prince, once the world's most eligible bachelor, the rebel royal, the cheeky redhead, finds himself begging, not to the public, not to his friends, but to his own father, the king? Welcome to the real story behind the headlines. This isn't about petty family drama. This is about legacy, money, betrayal, and a father's final, brutal decision. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Because what you're about to hear isn't just shocking, it's royal sabotage from the inside. Let's set the stage. Flashback 3 years. Harry and Meghan are still glowing from their multi-million-dollar deal with Netflix. They've got Spotify money rolling in. They've secured a sprawling Montecito estate with manicured gardens and ocean views. Security detail? Check. Nannies? Check. Personal chef, stylists, PR teams? Check, check, and double check. They were the envy of ex-royals worldwide. But underneath all that glamour, cracks were already starting to form. And behind the scenes, away from the Instagram-perfect photos, the glossy magazine spreads, the red carpet hand-holding, Prince Harry's finances were heading toward a cliff. And fast. Why? Because contrary to the public narrative, Harry wasn't self-made. Not even close. His entire adult life had been funded by royal coffers, from the Duchy of Cornwall to the Queen's private purse. The moment he stepped away from royal duties, the question wasn't, where will he live? It was, who's going to keep paying for it? And that question, whether Harry realized it or not, had a ticking clock attached to it. The truth? It wasn't just the British tabloids circling. It wasn't just the public raising eyebrows at the podcast that never aired or the Netflix projects that stalled. It was King Charles himself who had grown tired of the game. And when Charles finally made his move, the consequences rippled across 2 continents. But before we get to that moment, the moment the royal ATM went dark, you need to understand how the royal family plays financial chess. Because this was checkmate. The royal funding system is one of the most misunderstood mechanisms in the modern monarchy. Yes, there's the sovereign grant, taxpayer money that funds official royal duties. But there are also the private estates, the Duchy of Lancaster, the Duchy of Cornwall, billion-pound portfolios generating steady income for working royals. And that's the key word, working. When Harry and Meghan stepped back, they thought they could redefine what that meant. They wanted to be half in, half out. Use the titles, use the prestige, make the money, control the narrative. But Charles said no, not just as a father, as a king. You see, behind closed doors, Charles had long been preparing for a leaner monarchy. Fewer titles, fewer payouts, more value for money scrutiny. And when his own son challenged that structure, he drew the line. But that decision didn't happen in a vacuum. Sources say the final straw came during the now infamous Oprah interview, when Harry and Meghan claimed, on global television, that their security had been pulled, their funding cut, and that they were left to fend for themselves. Charles was livid. He felt ambushed, blindsided, publicly humiliated. And while Meghan's words drew global sympathy, Charles allegedly saw them as something else entirely, a declaration of war. Now, here's where it gets even messier. Because after all that, the interviews, the headlines, the tell-alls, Harry still reached out to his father privately. Not to reconcile, to ask for help, financial help, desperate help. And King Charles said no. But the story doesn't end there. Because when Harry couldn't get what he wanted from the crown, he turned to something even more dangerous. The media. He started dropping hints, talking about reconciliation, floating ideas about being open to repairing things, if only there was some acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Was it emotional blackmail? Was it strategy? Or was Harry just lost? That's what we're about to unravel. Over the next chapters, we'll take you deep inside. The exact moment Charles froze the money. The alleged letters Harry sent begging for financial support. The secret deals Meghan tried to secure behind the scenes. And why Hollywood stopped calling. The lawsuits that drained their bank accounts faster than a leaky yacht. The financial advisor who quit and allegedly leaked damning documents. And the final card Harry tried to play, invoking the name of the one person Charles couldn't ignore, Diana. This isn't just a story about money. It's about power. It's about shame and entitlement. and the brutal reality of what happens when you cut off a royal who's never had to manage a checkbook in his life. It's also about image, because while Harry may no longer be a working royal, make no mistake, he's still a symbol, a brand, a product. And when that product starts to lose value, even the world's most powerful institutions will walk away. But the most heartbreaking part of this story, it's not the money, it's not the lawsuits, not even the betrayals. It's what this feud has done to the idea of family. Because at the center of this financial war is a father and a son who once adored each other, now locked in a silent, bitter standoff with the eyes of the world watching. And the question no one dares ask out loud? What if they never speak again? What if this is it? What if Charles's decision to shut the door financially wasn't a punishment, but a goodbye? As we dive into the chapters ahead, keep this in mind. Harry thought he had time. Time to rebuild. Time to pivot. Time to repair the damage. But money doesn't wait. And in the royal world, timing is everything. Especially when your father is the king. And he's decided, finally, to cut you off. Completely. But what Harry didn't see coming was what Charles did next. And it changed everything, not just for Harry, but for the monarchy itself. What happens when a king decides to turn off the tap? No warning, no phone call, no discussion, just silence, and then nothing. No direct deposits, no financial advisor updates, no allocation from the Duchy of Cornwall. One day the funds were there, the next, gone. Was it revenge? Was it protocol? Or was it something far more calculated? Let's pull back the curtain. Because the moment King Charles shut down Harry's royal income wasn't just personal. It was political, strategic, symbolic. And it sent a message that echoed through the palaces, across the Atlantic, and into every royal analyst's column. If you leave the firm, you're on your own. But this story didn't start with the money being cut. It started with something much more emotional, pride, and Harry's refusal to back down. Let's rewind to the final months before the financial cutoff. By late 2020, Harry and Meghan had already moved to the US, giving up their royal duties but not their titles. They wanted independence on their terms. They were living in a multi-million-dollar mansion in Montecito, fresh off inking what was rumored to be a $100 million Netflix deal. Publicly, they seemed fine. But inside the palace, the mood was icy. Because while they were flying private and rubbing shoulders with Oprah, they were still relying, partially, on royal money. And Charles? He hated it. According to insiders, the king had been advised multiple times by both senior courtiers and legal consultants. If they're not working royals, they shouldn't receive working royal funds. But Charles had hesitated. At first, he didn't want to be the father who slammed the door shut. He still hoped they'd come back. He hoped the rift was temporary. So for months, he quietly approved financial support from the Duchy of Cornwall, not as a handout, but as a buffer. A way to let them adjust. A soft landing. But then came the bombshell that changed everything. March 7th, 2021. The Oprah interview. You remember it. The garden chairs. The chickens. The pregnant pause when Oprah said, "What?" But for Charles, it wasn't a primetime spectacle. It was a declaration of war. Because among all the accusations, racism, emotional neglect, titles withheld, there was one line that lit the fuse. We were told that our security would be removed and that the funding would be cut. Harry said it with emotion, with disbelief, as if the idea of losing royal money after stepping down was outrageous. Charles, according to one aide, was furious. He didn't recognize the son speaking on that screen. To the world, it looked like Harry was the victim of a cruel, unfeeling monarchy. To Charles, it was hypocrisy, ungrateful, emotional blackmail. He believed Harry had spun the narrative, conveniently omitting the millions still supporting his lifestyle during the transition. Behind the scenes, something shifted. Charles called a meeting, not with Harry, not with Meghan, but with his most trusted advisors, the Duchy accountants, and a handful of senior royals, including Camilla and, notably, Princess Anne. The question on the table? Should we cut him off now? The answer? Not unanimous. Camilla reportedly pushed for calm, arguing Harry was spiraling and needed space, not punishment. And the ever-practical, no-nonsense royal? She wasn't having it. One source claims she looked Charles straight in the eye and said, "If he's out, he's out. No one paid me to make speeches in California." And so the decision was made. By the end of the month, the funding would end completely. No more duchy stipends. No more security subsidies. No more palace accountants managing investments on Harry's behalf. It wasn't just a financial decision. It was a symbolic exile. The cutoff came quietly. No announcement. No press release. Just a line in an internal memo. Effective March 31st, 2021, HRH the Duke of Sussex shall no longer receive disbursements from duchy funds. But for Harry, it hit like a thunderclap. Sources say he didn't believe it at first. He thought it was a mistake. He even contacted Charles through a private secretary, who allegedly didn't respond. When that didn't work, Harry tried going through a former royal aide, someone he thought was still loyal. That person replied, "The king has made his decision. I'm sorry, let that sink in." From a prince raised in luxury to a man left reading automated banking alerts. How did it feel? Sources say Harry was livid, embarrassed, confused, betrayed. Because here's the truth. For all their talk about independence, neither Harry nor Meghan expected the rug to be pulled that hard. They thought they had leverage. The Oprah interview had boosted their profile. The Netflix deal made headlines. But inside the industry, there were already whispers that the couple's star power was fading, that they weren't delivering, that their content was flat and overproduced. And now, with no royal funds, they needed that Hollywood money more than ever. This is where things get even more tense. Because Meghan, always the planner, had allegedly warned Harry months earlier. "We can't rely on them forever," she said, according to a source close to her team. She pushed for more control over their finances. She allegedly hired a new business manager, someone with experience scaling celebrity brands. But Harry resisted. He trusted the royal system, even from abroad. He thought Charles wouldn't cut him off entirely, even after everything. He believed, truly, that there was still a line Charles wouldn't cross. But he was wrong. And as the reality sank in, things inside the Montecito estate grew tense. Meghan wanted to pivot, fast, launch new ventures, lock in more sponsors, go public. Harry? He froze. Some insiders say he slipped into a depression, others call it a financial panic. Because here's something few people understand. While Harry inherited roughly 10 to 13 million pounds from Diana, a significant chunk of that was already tied up in trusts, taxed, or used to secure their estate and lifestyle. Add on lawsuits, security, staffing, and travel, and that fortune starts bleeding fast. The loss of duchy income didn't just sting emotionally. It created a crisis. Meghan's team scrambled to lock down more partnerships. PR firms were called. Branding proposals floated. Even a second Oprah special was discussed, something raw. Maybe even a documentary about Harry's childhood. But Charles wasn't finished. Because just as Harry was absorbing the blow, Charles made sure another door was closed. A quiet phone call to the Royal Collection Trust. A sealed letter to the Treasury. An updated inheritance document. One by one, the fallback options were being removed. No back channels. No emergency funds. No favors from old palace staff. Why? Because Charles wasn't just cutting off a son. He was sending a message to the rest of the monarchy, to the next generation, to the public. You can't have the crown and cash out. And as news of the cutoff leaked, slowly, through insider columns and whispered quotes, Harry realized something chilling. He had no allies left inside the machine. Not Charles, not William, not the courtiers, not even the private accountants. And so, with no money coming in, Harry did something he swore he'd never do again. He wrote to his father, not as a duke, not as a brand, but as a son. A letter that, according to palace sources, shocked even the king's staff with its tone. Some called it heartfelt. Some called it desperate. Others manipulative. We'll unpack that letter in the next chapter. But know this. When King Charles made the decision to shut down Harry's income, he didn't just sever a financial tie. He severed the last remaining thread holding their relationship together. And in the royal world, that kind of silence speaks louder than any crown. But just as Charles turned his back, Harry began planning his next move. And that move came in the form of a handwritten plea. A letter no one saw coming. A letter that would change everything. Again, what does it take for a grown man, a prince, to write a letter begging his father for help? How do you start a letter like that? Dear Dad, I'm struggling. Or does the royal blood make it colder? Your Majesty, I write in a spirit of reconciliation. Or maybe, just maybe, it wasn't Harry who wrote the first draft. Because here's where things get interesting. According to multiple insiders, the letter Prince Harry sent to King Charles wasn't just a heartfelt plea for financial support. It was a carefully constructed document, curated, polished, and possibly even workshopped with PR consultants. Yes, you read that right. Not a call, not a text, not a Zoom session. A formal letter, handwritten by Harry himself, but with guidance. Because in the world of royalty, paper matters. Ink matters. Words matter. And this letter wasn't just about emotion. It was strategy. Let's break it down. The letter, according to two palace sources, arrived at Clarence House in a discreet cream envelope, marked private and delivered by hand through a courier, not the post. The king was in residence. The courier was let in through the side entrance. Security scanned the envelope. Standard protocol. But when the aide read the sender's name, HRH the Duke of Sussex, they reportedly froze. A moment of silence. Then, without a word, the envelope was placed on a tray outside the king's study. Now here's the question. What did that letter say? We may never see the full thing. But according to leaks from two separate camps, one inside Clarence House, the other close to the Sussex team, we can piece together a pretty chilling outline. First, it opened with sentiment. Harry allegedly began by calling Charles "Dear Papa," a deliberate throwback to their more affectionate past, echoing Diana's own use of the word in private notes. He acknowledged the deep pain between them. He said he regretted how things had unfolded. He referenced the Oprah interview, not to apologize, but to reframe. He described it, allegedly, as an act of desperation. That's the word he used, desperation. Not vindictiveness, not revenge. He tried to remind Charles of the pressures he and Meghan had felt, the scrutiny, the trauma. Then came the pivot. In the second paragraph, the tone changed, from emotional to practical. Harry requested a temporary financial bridge to cover security, housing expenses, and legal fees, while he and Meghan restructured their business ventures. He did not ask to return to royal duties. He did not ask for permanent support, but he did ask for help. Not as a duke, as a son. He even referenced Diana's wishes, suggesting she would have wanted Charles to protect their children, Archie and Lilibet, regardless of royal status. And in the final paragraph, he made what sources are calling a subtle threat. Not overt, not aggressive, but enough to raise eyebrows. He allegedly wrote, "I would rather resolve this privately between father and son than see this relationship debated endlessly in the press." That's it. That line. To some, a plea for dignity. To others, an ultimatum. And King Charles? He read the letter, in full, alone, twice. And then, according to multiple insiders, he placed it back in its envelope, turned to his desk, and said nothing. No reply was sent. Not by mail. Not by text. Not even a formal acknowledgement. Just silence. Why? Because to Charles, that letter wasn't reconciliation. It was manipulation. It was emotion dressed up in PR language. It was insulting. He reportedly said to Camilla later that evening, he wants the money back, not the family. But Harry didn't give up. Within 2 weeks, a second letter was sent. This one shorter, more direct. It was rumored to have included a line about Harry's mental health and how the financial pressures were compounding stress related to ongoing legal battles. Charles, again, refused to reply. But someone else did. Princess Anne. Now this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Because Anne, often silent in public, icy in the press, allegedly sent Harry a handwritten note of her own. A simple card. No envelope, no courier. Just a folded page delivered through one of her staffers who still had ties to the Sussex household. It read, "You always knew where the line was. You crossed it. Now find your way back." That was it. That was Anne's version of help. Not money. Not favors. A challenge. A warning. A message, perhaps, that there was still a path back, but only if Harry took it without strings, without demands. But Harry wasn't interested in cryptic postcards. He was interested in answers, in support, in something, anything, from the father he had once held hands with at Diana's funeral, from the man who once called him "my darling boy." So what did Harry do? He turned to Meghan. And Meghan, according to Hollywood insiders, wasn't shocked. She had been anticipating this moment for over a year. A private letter to the palace? She allegedly thought it was naive. She believed, and had long believed that the monarchy was done playing nice. In a private conversation, she's reported to have said, "They want us broken, not just gone." So together, they made a decision. They would write one more letter. But this time, not to Charles. This time to Camilla. That's right. The woman Diana once called the third person in her marriage. The woman Meghan allegedly never trusted, but now believed might be the only one who could speak to Charles in a way that got through. The Camilla letter, as it's come to be called by insiders, remains a mystery. No leaks, no confirmations, just one source. A palace staffer who claims to have seen the envelope in Camilla's office, unopened, days after it was delivered. Whether she read it or not, we may never know. But one thing's for certain. The palace knew Harry was reaching out. Repeatedly, desperately, publicly framing it as reconciliation, but privately pleading for financial support. And this is where the real contradiction explodes. Because while Harry was writing these heartfelt letters, his team was also feeding the media narratives about him being at peace with his decision. Think about that. On one hand, emotional letters begging for help. On the other, podcast interviews, People magazine exclusives, sources close to the Duke saying he was flourishing in California. Which one was the truth? Were both true? Was he torn? Or was the public narrative a mask? One more PR illusion covering the financial storm building behind the scenes? Either way, the palace wasn't buying it. And Charles? He stayed silent. For nearly 6 months, no direct communication occurred between father and son, not even after Archie's birthday, not even after Prince Philip's memorial. But behind closed doors, Charles was tracking every move. He knew about the Netflix slowdown. He knew about the Spotify exit. He knew about Archewell's struggles to maintain donors. And, according to royal aides, he believed that responding to Harry's letters would only reward the public pressure campaign. So he didn't. And that silence? It sent Harry into a tailspin. Because by mid-2023, legal bills were mounting. The Netflix team was growing frustrated with delays. Hollywood circles were growing cold. And Meghan? She was shifting her focus, rebranding herself for solo projects, lifestyle ventures, new partnerships. The emotional bridge was gone. And Harry, the boy who once walked behind his mother's coffin, the man who once commanded a royal fortune, was now standing at the edge of the abyss. No royal funds, no reply from the king, no path back that he could see. But just when it seemed like the silence would last forever, a new opportunity appeared. Not from the palace, not from Camilla, not from Anne, from someone in the entertainment world, someone with access, power, and a personal reason to get involved. And that someone was about to offer Harry the kind of support money couldn't buy. Support that came with conditions. Support that would drag everything, back into the spotlight. But before we get to that offer, we need to talk about the real heart of the problem. Because the money may have stopped flowing. But the damage? It was just beginning. What do you do when the royal money dries up, Hollywood starts ghosting you, and the public sympathy train has slowed to a crawl? You pivot. You rebrand. You monetize the one thing you still have left. The titles. Duke and Duchess of Sussex. It sounds prestigious, regal, timeless. But to Meghan Markle, it sounded like opportunity. Because while Harry was busy penning letters to his father, navigating emotional rejection and a mounting legal avalanche, Meghan was already several moves ahead. She wasn't waiting for the palace to make peace. She was planning for war. And her strategy? Turn their royal titles into a global lifestyle brand. This wasn't about charity anymore. It wasn't even about reconciliation. It was about survival, status, power, and cash. Let's rewind. In the months following the royal financial cutoff, Meghan's inner circle was buzzing with ideas. According to sources close to her camp, she had gathered a small team of PR advisors, brand consultants, and former entertainment lawyers to ask a single question. What can we legally do with the Sussex name? It's a fair question. On one hand, the monarchy had blocked them from using Sussex Royal as a brand after their exit, citing protocol, reputational risk, and what one palace source bluntly called cashing in on the crown. But on the other hand, they still held the titles. Harry was, and remains, the Duke of Sussex. Meghan, his Duchess. They weren't stripped. They weren't revoked. And that technicality opened a loophole wide enough to drive a Netflix production truck through. So Meghan moved fast. Behind the scenes, She trademarked everything she could. Archwell, the Duchess podcast, Meghan of Montecito, even phrases like Pearl, the animated series that would eventually collapse before release. She didn't just want to monetize the titles. She wanted to create an empire around them. But here's where it gets sticky. Because while Meghan saw opportunity, the palace saw exploitation. Multiple palace insiders claim that Charles had been briefed on Meghan's trademark blitz, and he was not amused. At one point, he reportedly told a senior courtier, "You don't see Princess in selling cookbooks, do you?" The problem was, Charles couldn't stop it. Not without igniting another PR firestorm. He couldn't take the titles back, not easily. That would require parliamentary input, public justification, and it would risk making Harry and Meghan martyrs. So instead, he waited. He watched, and Meghan pressed forward. Her first major play? The Netflix deal. It was pitched as a way to tell inspiring human stories. But insiders now say the real hook, the thing that got Netflix executives excited, was access to the royal world. The Sussex brand. Behind the scenes, Meghan allegedly promised never-before-seen perspectives, exclusive footage, and even hinted that private Windsor content might be on the table. It worked. Netflix wrote the check. But here's the twist. Once the deal was signed, the footage wasn't there. The access wasn't as intimate. The stories weren't as dramatic. And the ratings? Mediocre. The Harry and Meghan docuseries performed decently, especially in the first week, but by Netflix standards, it didn't justify the hype or the cost. And once the dust settled, execs were asking the same question Charles had. Are they worth it? Now let's talk about Spotify. Meghan's podcast, Archetypes, was heavily promoted. With a sleek trailer, high-profile guests, and a polished rollout. But beneath the surface, it was all smoke and mirrors. Staff turnover plagued production. Creative direction changed multiple times. And Meghan's hands-on approach, often controlling and perfectionistic, according to one producer, made scheduling chaotic. After just 12 episodes, Spotify pulled the plug. Officially, it was a mutual decision. Unofficially, it was a disaster. Executives later described the Sussexes as grifters, a word that exploded across headlines and trended for days. And suddenly, the title-based brand Meghan had built was starting to depreciate. Because in Hollywood, image is currency, and their image was bleeding value by the minute. Even Meghan's attempts to pivot into solo ventures, including a rumored lifestyle brand akin to Goop, began to face headwinds. Why? Because the press had turned. No longer darlings of the woke elite, the Sussexes were now viewed as unpredictable, high-maintenance, and, worst of all, unprofitable. And through it all, one question kept surfacing in industry circles. What do they do exactly? That's when Meghan launched her final card, the Duchess of Sussex brand. It was meant to be a standalone identity, separating Meghan from Harry, elevating her as a public figure, a speaker, a designer, an activist. She planned collaborations with fashion houses. She explored wellness products. She even filmed test footage for a daytime talk format. But the moment the public heard the words Duchess of Sussex, backlash erupted. Critics accused her of exploiting a title she no longer earned. Royalists demanded the monarchy strip her of it. And polls? Disastrous. In both the UK and US, favorability dropped sharply, especially among middle-aged women, a key demographic for her brand. So what did Meghan do? She disappeared. Not completely, but noticeably. No red carpet appearances. No major interviews. No product launches. Just silence. And in that silence came the realization. The royal titles, the very thing she had hoped to monetize, were now poisoned assets. Too controversial for prestige brands. Too weak for consumer loyalty. Too tied to an institution that wanted nothing more to do with her. And yet, she couldn't let them go. Because without the titles, what was left? A former actress. A former royal. A former influencer. The Sussex brand had been built on a single, fragile foundation. Access to the crown. Now that the crown had cut them off, everything was crumbling. And Harry? He was caught in the middle. Because while Meghan was orchestrating branding meetings and damage control sessions, he was still mourning the letter that never got a reply. Still hoping Charles might change his mind. Still not realizing that his father had already moved on, not just emotionally, but legally. Because while Meghan was trying to build something new, Charles was quietly preparing to dismantle the last thing they had left. A decision was coming, one that would shake the royal landscape again. And this time, it wouldn't be financial. It would be constitutional. But before that hammer fell, Harry's team faced another crisis, a much more immediate one, because just as Meghan's monetization plan collapsed, another blow landed, right in the heart of their foundation. The one thing they thought they controlled, the one thing they built to replace the palace, Archewell, and it was about to fall apart. They promised to change the world, a foundation that would empower communities, tell untold stories, fund causes close to their hearts. They called it Archewell, but behind the inspirational mission statements, stylized logos, and press-friendly taglines, the truth was far less glamorous. Because Archewell, the nonprofit meant to be Harry and Meghan's legacy, was imploding, quietly, messily, and fast. You see, Archewell wasn't just a charity. It was their lifeboat. After Megxit, the foundation was pitched as the new royal court, a California-based platform for speeches, media, philanthropy, and cultural impact. But as the palace doors slammed shut, Archewell became something else entirely. A pressure cooker, a branding exercise, and eventually, a PR liability. Let's start at the beginning. Launched in October 2020, Archewell was designed to encompass three pillars. Archewell Foundation, the nonprofit philanthropic arm. Archewell Audio, the podcast division under Spotify. Archewell Productions, their Netflix-funded film and docuseries branch. It looked sleek, modern, purpose-driven, but almost immediately, the cracks started showing. First, structure. The foundation went live without key leadership hires. No permanent executive director. No confirmed board. No financial transparency roadmap. Donors, especially high-profile corporate ones, were nervous. Where was the governance? Where was the vetting? According to internal documents leaked to a U.S.-based nonprofit watchdog, Archewell missed its first IRS filing deadline, only to submit a retroactive amendment months later. That's not illegal, but in the world of elite charity fundraising, it's a red flag. Now let's talk about personnel. Between 2020 and 2023, Archewell reportedly lost more than 12 key staffers, including the chief operating officer, the head of communications, 2 podcast producers, a senior content strategist, and even a Meghan-approved PR gatekeeper. Why? Conflicting accounts. Some say burnout. Others describe a toxic perfectionism from Meghan, who allegedly insisted on rewriting press releases herself and micromanaging every detail. One former staffer went so far as to call Archewell a house of mirrors. And then came the financial questions. Tax filings showed modest donations, but far less than expected given their access, their brand, and their high-profile network. In 2021, Archewell reported under $3 million in donations. For context, Prince William and Kate's Royal Foundation raised over $20 million in the same year. Where was the money going? Well, a large chunk went to production costs, PR, travel. One line item sparked particular outrage online. Over $100,000 in security-related expenses that were not clearly itemized. Critics asked, was this charitable work or a royal lifestyle write-off? Things got worse in 2022. The Spotify deal collapsed. Netflix production stalled. Donor fatigue set in. And just when Archewell needed a win, they launched a docuseries on mental health, which got buried in the algorithm and failed to trend globally. Then came the lawsuits. 2 separate California-based nonprofits accused Archewell of using overlapping brand language and duplicating portions of published mission statements. Nothing came of it legally. But the headlines? Brutal. Archewell accused of copycat charity work. Sussex Foundation's legal storm grows. Donors ask, where's the impact? Meghan, ever image-conscious, was reportedly furious. She demanded a brand audit. New designers were brought in. Content was scrubbed. Even the website was redesigned, shifting from a warm beige to sleek white minimalism with a corporate tone. But none of it fixed the core problem. People no longer knew what Archewell stood for. Was it a charity? A content studio? A political platform? Or just a shell? Because here's where it got really messy. Behind the scenes, Meghan's team began floating the idea of pivoting Archewell into a B Corp, a hybrid entity that could engage in social enterprise and for-profit ventures. It would let them monetize without the burden of traditional nonprofit rules. But Harry allegedly resisted. To him, Archewell was personal. It had Diana's legacy in its bones. It wasn't supposed to be a moneymaker. It was supposed to matter. And now? It was a brand in crisis, with donor trust fading and operational confusion reigning. Even their partnerships were crumbling. A planned collaboration with a global children's literacy nonprofit fell through. Reportedly because Meghan wanted more creative control than the board allowed. A mental health tech startup removed Archewell's logo from their website quietly, without press. A women's leadership panel in NYC was canceled, no official reason given. By mid-2024, the Archewell team had shrunk to less than half of what it once was. Internally, morale was low. One employee described it bluntly. No one knew what the mission was anymore. We were chasing headlines, not change. Then came the final blow, a financial leak. Internal documents showing Archewell's 2023 donations had dropped 38% year-over-year. The media pounced. Archewell's impact in decline. Sussex is silent on foundation troubles. IRS filings reveal major drop in donor confidence. The royal PR machine, once the target of Sussex criticism, now had ammunition of its own. Palace insiders reportedly told the press, "A real charity doesn't need Netflix." Ouch. But here's the twist. Even as Archewell was struggling, Charles was watching, tracking, and preparing. Because to him, Archewell wasn't just a failed foundation. It was proof. Proof that Harry and Meghan couldn't build something lasting without the monarchy. That without the crown, the machine broke down. And that's why, according to insiders, Charles made the next move. One final act that would fully sever Harry's access to royal financial fallback options. It wasn't about Archewell. It was about control. And Charles was done playing games. He was about to lock down the last remaining escape hatch. And Harry? He had no idea it was coming. Because while Archewell burned quietly, Charles was preparing to cut the last financial thread. The one Harry never thought would be touched. The inheritance. It started with a headline, then a lawsuit, then another, and another, until suddenly, Prince Harry wasn't just fighting for his reputation. He was drowning in legal battles on multiple fronts, courtroom dramas that bled him dry, day by day, invoice by invoice. Because here's the brutal truth the glossy headlines won't say. Harry's war against the British tabloids didn't just cost him emotionally. It may have cost him his financial future. So what went wrong? Let's rewind to the first spark. The Daily Mail, The Sun, The Mirror. For years, these outlets profited off Harry's pain, from teenage antics to military deployments to Meghan's every move. When Harry left the royal family, he didn't just step back. He declared war. Publicly, legally. He was going to change the media and expose the lies. It sounded noble, but noble causes don't come cheap. Let's break down the cases. Case 1, the phone hacking lawsuit. Harry sued Mirror Group newspapers, alleging illegal phone tapping that dated back decades. The case dragged through the UK courts for over 18 months. Legal fees? Estimated £1.5 million. And while Harry won a partial victory, the court didn't grant him all the damages he sought, just a fraction. Not only that, but he was required to pay portions of the defendant's legal costs for claims that were dropped mid-case. The win was symbolic. The bill was real. Case 2. The Daily Mail security lawsuit. Harry launched another suit, this time over a Mail on Sunday article that questioned his offer to pay for personal security in the UK. It seemed small, but Harry saw it as a reputational attack, an attempt to paint him as entitled and dishonest. He pushed the case forward, ignoring palace aides and PR experts who urged caution. Legal insiders say the bill on that case alone, just in preliminary hearings, surpassed £500,000. It wasn't just money. It was time, focus, strategy. And behind the scenes, his legal team, based in both the UK and California, was reportedly overwhelmed. Why? Because Harry kept suing. Case 3, the U.S. immigration FOIA battle. This one came out of left field. A U.S. conservative think tank sued the Biden administration, demanding the release of Harry's immigration application. Why? Because of admissions in Spare, his memoir about past drug use. If true, those admissions could have disqualified him from a U.S. visa. Harry wasn't the plaintiff this time, but he was the center of it. His legal team in America jumped in, filing opposition briefs and engaging with DHS lawyers behind the scenes. PR fallout. Huge. Legal cost. Growing. But it didn't stop there. Case 4. The security fight against the UK government. Perhaps the most expensive battle of all. Harry sued the Home Office over their decision to strip him of full police protection while in the UK, a service once afforded to senior royals. He argued that he and his family were exposed to threats, and that offering to pay for protection should entitle him to the same level of service. But the British government pushed back hard. They argued that police protection isn't a pay-to-play system. It's a matter of public interest, not private wealth. Court proceedings dragged on for over a year. Documents were sealed, hearings held behind closed doors, and costs. According to security law experts, Harry's side may have spent £2 to £3 million on this case alone, including international consultants, bodyguard testimonies, and expert witnesses. Here's the irony. If Harry had simply hired elite private security, without trying to sue the government, he would have saved millions. But that wasn't the point. He wanted validation. He wanted the status that came with royal-level protection, and he was willing to burn through cash to get it. Let's pause for a second. All told, conservative estimates place Harry's legal spending over £5 million between 2021 and 2024. And that doesn't include back-end PR crisis management, internal legal staff on retainer, or costs related to settling disputes before they even hit court. Now ask yourself, where was this money coming from? Because by this point, royal funding was gone. Netflix was quiet. Spotify had vanished. Archewell was faltering. And Meghan was pivoting to solo projects. That left two sources. Diana's inheritance, valued at £10 to £13 million, most of which had already been used to buy the Montecito estate and maintain private expenses. Loan cash, including alleged short-term funding from wealthy Hollywood allies, and possibly even Meghan's own independent earnings from pre-marriage endeavors. But there's a catch. Because according to a leaked financial analysis circulated among royal correspondents, Harry's legal cash burn rate was unsustainable. At the peak of his lawsuits, he was spending nearly £500,000 per month on legal fees, security upgrades, travel, and staff salaries. That kind of spending? Even billionaires would blink. And Harry? He wasn't a billionaire. He was a former royal trying to sustain a lifestyle and a war at the same time. It wasn't going to last. And then it happened. A memo leaked from inside one of his legal teams, allegedly detailing a request for external funding assistance. Who leaked it? We still don't know. But the press had a field day. Prince Harry broke. Sussexes quietly seek financial backers for legal crusade. Megxit's real cost revealed. And suddenly, everything Harry had fought for, his image, his dignity, his battle against the tabloids, was now the butt of jokes. He was mocked on late-night shows, skewered in tabloids. Even former fans began questioning whether the fight was worth it. But Harry refused to stop. Why? Because to him, it wasn't just about money. It was about control, identity, revenge. The tabloids had tormented his mother. He believed they were destroying his wife. This was justice at any cost, even if that cost was his last safety net. And here's the most tragic twist. Just as his lawsuits were peaking and his bank accounts depleting, King Charles made a move that no one saw coming. A legal maneuver. Quiet, bureaucratic, ruthless. He restructured a royal trust, once earmarked to deliver income to Harry after the age of 40. That income, gone. Legal scholars are still debating whether it was even possible. But Charles had lawyers, power, time. And Harry? He had none of the above. So the lawsuits didn't just drain his cash. They triggered the next royal retaliation, the inheritance lockdown, the final cutoff. But before we dive into that move, you need to know how desperate things became. Because just as Harry was losing in the courts, he made a call, a private one, to someone he hadn't spoken to in months. And that call could have changed everything. He waited 3 hours before hitting call, not because he was unsure of the number, but because he wasn't sure who would pick up. Would it be his brother? Or the heir to the throne? Because at this point, after everything, Harry didn't know who he was calling anymore. And William? He didn't know who was calling him either. But when that call finally connected, just after 7:30 p.m. London time, it wasn't about forgiveness. It was about survival. And the voice on the other end? colder than Harry ever expected. Let's back up. By early 2024, Harry's situation was growing critical. Financially depleted, legally overextended, politically isolated from both the palace and the Hollywood elite. Even his once rock-solid base of U.S. media support had started to crack. The Netflix buzz had died down. The Spotify deal was gone. And Archwell, bleeding relevance. What did Harry have left? Family. Or so he hoped. Because there was one person who still had direct access to the Duchy of Cornwall. One person who still had the power to grant favors, restore titles, or at the very least, reopen channels of communication. Prince William, the man who would be king. Harry had avoided this call for over a year. Ever since that last bitter exchange at Prince Philip's funeral, when, according to lip readers and leaked reports, William allegedly told Harry, "You've done enough damage." But desperation changes things, and Harry, for the first time, was willing to risk another humiliation if it meant some kind of lifeline. So he picked up his phone, scrolled to the number, paused, and hit call. It rang, and just when Harry was about to hang up, click, hello. A pause. Then Harry's voice, softer than usual. Hey, it's me. No bro. No Wills. Just, it's me. What followed, according to insiders familiar with Harry's recounting of the call, was a 23-minute conversation that swung wildly between awkward civility and deep emotional tension. At first, it was all surface. How are the kids? How's Kate feeling? How's California? But beneath every word was the unsaid. What happened to us? Then Harry said it. Not directly, not as a request, but as a truth. I'm in a tough place. Things haven't worked out how I thought. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for titles. He asked for time. Time with the family. A possible path back. Not a full return, but a space to rebuild trust, privately. He suggested they meet over the summer, perhaps at Sandringham. A quiet reunion. Just the two of them. No press. No cameras. No aides. William listened. Didn't interrupt. But when he finally responded, it wasn't what Harry expected. His tone, according to one source who later saw a message summarizing the call, was clinical. You made your choices, Harry. We all did. He wasn't cruel, but he was firm. William reportedly told Harry that the monarchy had moved on, that too much had been said publicly, and that even if he wanted to help, there are others who won't allow it. Translation, the institution would block it. And then came the final blow. William allegedly said, "You don't trust us. You went to Netflix before you came to me. You went to Oprah, to publishers. You made us content." The accusation was clear. Harry hadn't just broken ranks, he'd commodified the family. And that, to William, was unforgivable. Harry tried to explain, tried to say the interviews were meant to tell his truth, not burn bridges. But William cut him off. Not with anger, with exhaustion. We're not the same anymore. You left. That was your right. But don't act like you're shocked that things are different now. They ended the call not with an explosion, but with silence. No goodbye. No next steps. No invitation. Just a deadline. And Harry? He sat with that silence for a long time. Sources say he didn't tell Meghan immediately. He went for a walk. Alone. Down through the hills of Montecito. Past the lemon trees and designer mailboxes and sunlit driveways of homes paid for by people who hadn't bet everything on escaping royalty. And in that silence, something changed. He realized the door wasn't just closed. It had been locked, bolted, painted over. Because William, the brother he once tackled into the grass as kids, the brother who covered for him during his Vegas scandal, who stood beside him at Diana's statue unveiling, was done. Not out of hatred, but because William had something Harry didn't. A future within the system. William couldn't afford to have a liability. Not now. Not when Charles was scaling down the monarchy. Not when public approval was fragile. Not when Queen Camilla's influence was rising. And so, for William, Harry was no longer a partner. He was a risk. And in royal life, risks don't get second chances. But here's where it gets worse. Because Harry thought that would be the end of it. Just a failed phone call. Just another no. But what he didn't realize was that someone else had been listening. Not literally, but figuratively. Because news of the William Harry call leaked within 72 hours. To the British press. Then to the American tabloids. Then to the late-night comedians. Harry begs for help from William. Prince William says no second chances. Palace sources, Sussexes rejected behind closed doors. The headlines weren't just humiliating. They were strategic. Someone inside the system wanted this call public. Why? To make it clear, to the press, to donors, to Netflix, to Hollywood, that Harry was no longer part of the inner circle. That any fantasy of reconciliation was just that, fantasy. And Meghan? She was livid. According to a source close to her team, she allegedly said, "I told them not to call. I told them they'd use it against us." For once, Harry didn't argue. Because she was right. The call hadn't healed anything. It had confirmed everything. The palace wasn't waiting for him to come back. It was moving forward without him. But just when all seemed lost, just as Harry resigned himself to financial exile, royal silence, and media ridicule, a new development dropped. Not from William. Not from Charles. But from someone he never expected. Someone who had long been painted as the villain. Someone who had survived the public scorn, won over the Queen, and now stood beside the King. Queen Camilla. And the next move she made would change everything. If someone told you that Queen Camilla, the woman once dubbed the most hated woman in Britain, would one day be the only senior royal to step in on Harry's behalf, would you believe it? Because that's exactly what happened. Not loudly, not publicly, and not without risk, but in the quiet halls of Clarence House, between official dinners and state briefings, Camilla made a move no one saw coming. She reached out, not to Meghan, not to the press, but to Harry. Let's rewind. By the summer of 2024, the royal family was done talking. Charles had locked the accounts. William had shut the door and had warned him in writing. The staff had gone silent. But Camilla? She watched, listened, calculated. Because if anyone understood the cost of royal exile, of being hated by the press, sidelined by courtiers, and blamed for the family's pain, it was her. She knew the signs. The desperation in Harry's interviews. The guarded language in Meghan's press statements. The ever-tightening grip of lawsuits and Hollywood fatigue. And she knew something else too. That no one was winning. Not Harry. Not the monarchy. Not the legacy of Diana. Not the institution she had fought to protect. So she made a decision. Not a grand gesture. A tea. That's right. A quiet, private invitation, handwritten on royal stationery, sent through a trusted staffer with no media connections and a spotless loyalty record. No press. No leaks. Just one sentence. If you're ever in the country, I'd like to talk. No titles. No politics. Just tea. And Harry? He was stunned. Camilla had never been a safe space for him. She was the woman at the center of the Charles-Diana disaster. The stepmother he never asked for. He had spoken coldly of her in spare. Described her as dangerous. Accused her of leaking to the press. So why reach out? Why now? Sources close to Camilla say she believed two things. That Harry's spiral had become unsustainable. That the king, her husband, wouldn't budge unless someone else made the first move. And Harry? Despite every instinct, he said yes. The meeting took place at Highgrove House. No staff, no cameras, just a roaring fire. 2 cups of Earl Grey, and 22 years of tension in the air. They sat opposite each other. Harry wore a plain navy sweater and jeans. Camilla, ever composed, sipped tea from a china cup she'd owned since before Diana's death. And then she said it. You don't have to like me, but we both love the same man. And he's hurting. Harry didn't speak. Camilla continued. She acknowledged the pain, acknowledged the exile, acknowledged the silence. And then, shockingly, she acknowledged her own mistakes. According to one aide briefed afterward, Camilla told Harry, "I was never trying to replace your mother. I was trying to survive." That sentence broke the silence. Harry allegedly nodded, then spoke for the first time. "You succeeded." She didn't. The air froze. Camilla didn't flinch. She just sipped her tea, waited, let it sit. And that's when the real conversation began. For over an hour, they talked. Not about lawsuits. Not about money. Not about titles. About Charles. How he cried behind closed doors after the Oprah interview. How he begged aides not to leak a rebuttal. How he feared seeing Harry in public would result in shouting, or worse, staged photos. Harry listened. Said nothing. Camilla pressed on. "He thinks you hate him. That you'd rather burn the palace down than walk through the gates again." Harry replied, "That's not true." Camilla, "Then tell him." Harry, "He won't pick up." Camilla, calmly, "Then write him." But this time, without demands. There it was. The suggestion, the pivot, the chance, not to be funded, not to be reinstated, but to be heard. Camilla didn't promise forgiveness. She didn't promise titles. She didn't even promise to pass the message along. What she gave Harry was a mirror and a choice to write, to explain, to let go of the performative grief and show the real kind. Because here's the contradiction. Harry wanted support, but he'd turned his pain into a business. A Netflix special, a memoir, a podcast. And Charles? He saw that as betrayal. Camilla wanted to show Harry another path, a quieter one without cameras, just family. But Meghan wasn't convinced. When Harry returned to Montecito and told her about the tea with Camilla, she reportedly reacted with caution. Why now, she asked. What's in it for her? Harry didn't have an answer. He just knew the meeting had shifted something. For the first time in years, someone inside the palace hadn't just spoken to him. They had listened. But the ripple effect didn't stop there. Within 2 weeks of the Camilla meeting, something strange happened. An anonymous palace source leaked that the king remains fond of both sons. A rarely seen 2006 photo of Charles, Camilla, and Harry was posted on a royal social media account. And a speech Charles gave at a veterans event included the words, "All families face distance. It's what we do with it that defines our legacy." Coincidence? Or coded message? The press speculated wildly. Was Camilla brokering a truce? Was Harry being courted back? Was this a new chapter? But behind the scenes, something else was brewing. Because while Camilla had opened the door slightly, someone inside the palace was determined to slam it shut. An internal document was circulating, marked confidential. It detailed a pending financial decision. One that would erase any hope of fallback funds for Harry. Not from Charles, not from the duchy, but from something older, more sacred, Princess Diana's estate. Because while Harry had been writing letters, fighting lawsuits, and sipping tea with his stepmother, a quiet legal maneuver was unfolding. A move that would touch the untouchable, his mother's will. And what happened next would shake Harry to his core. He wasn't supposed to be there. Not officially, not on the schedule, not in any press release. But Harry arrived anyway. Balmoral, the Queen's beloved Scottish estate, the heart of royal tradition, the last place on earth where Harry thought he might find something. Maybe peace. Maybe reconciliation. Maybe, if only for a weekend, the feeling of family again. But what he got instead was humiliation. Let's rewind to late August 2024. The annual Balmoral retreat was underway. A tradition that dated back to Queen Victoria. An invitation-only, off-the-grid, tartan-filled affair where the royals could fish, hike, and pose for the occasional family photo in matching wax jackets. This year, King Charles extended invites to Prince William, Kate, and the children, Princess Anne and Sir Timothy, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, even Zara and Mike Tyndall. But Harry? His name wasn't on the list. And yet, he came, not out of defiance, but out of hope. After his quiet tea with Camilla weeks earlier, Harry had begun to believe, foolishly or not, that the family was ready to thaw. No red carpet, no formal return, just a weekend, just one dinner. But what happened at Balmoral sent a very different message. The moment Harry's car pulled up to the gates, a black Range Rover driven by a private security detail, things began to unravel. A guard at the front entrance looked confused, checked his list. Twice. No Duke of Sussex. Then the radio crackled. An awkward back and forth. Finally, they let him in. But barely. Sources say Harry's room, normally reserved in the main house, had been reassigned. Instead, he was placed in the Craigawwan Lodge, a separate building on the estate used for overflow staff and visiting non-royals. No valet, no butler, no footmen, just a key. Already, the message was clear: you're not family. You're a guest. That night, dinner was scheduled for 7:30 p.m. sharp in the Balmoral drawing room. Harry arrived at 7:29, walked in, and every head turned. Not with joy, with discomfort. William didn't stand. Charles looked down at his plate. Only Camilla offered a tight smile. There was no seat set for Harry at the main table. A footman was whispered to. A smaller table was added to the side. Not adjoining, not touching, separate. That was where Harry sat, like a distant cousin from another country. Sources who attended that dinner say it was excruciating. Small talk dominated. No one asked Harry about California. No one mentioned Meghan. And when he brought up his children, The room fell quiet. Even worse, Kate, seated next to William, allegedly excused herself early with a headache. The kids, we're told, were kept away entirely. No playtime. No hugs for Uncle Harry. Nothing. And it wasn't over. The following morning, the family gathered for the traditional Balmoral group photo, an annual shot usually kept private.